Can you imagine losing 100,000 jobs in just 21 days? That's what's happening across America right now. An economic earthquake tearing through factories, offices, and farms before families even get their next paycheck. The brutal reality is that this collapse isn't limited to one industry or one city. It's spreading like wildfire, fueled by crushing tariffs, vanishing exports, and soaring costs that leave businesses no choice but to cut workers loose. Entire states are spiraling into chaos, where unemployment lines grow longer every sunrise. These aren't just numbers. This is America's job market on the edge of total collapse. Number 5. Ohio. Ohio is collapsing at a speed no one thought possible. In just 21 days, over 15,000 workers in the state have been thrown out of factories, warehouses, and offices. Think about that. Every single day for 3 weeks, more than 700 Ohio families lost their paychecks. The Buckeye State, once the proud industrial backbone of America, is bleeding jobs like it's 1980 all over again, only faster, uglier, and with no clear way out. The trigger? Trump's brutal 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum. What was sold as a move to protect American jobs has turned into Ohio's economic death sentence. Steel mills in Cleveland and Youngstown report that production costs have exploded by $120 to $150 per ton, pricing them out of the global market. Orders from Europe and Asia are down by as much as 40%, leaving furnaces cold and workers idled. U.S. Steel's Ohio division has already announced mass furloughs, and local suppliers say they've lost contracts worth tens of millions of dollars overnight. The steel capital of America is now watching its last lifeline snap in real time. But it doesn't stop with steel. Ohio's auto sector, which employs nearly 90,000 workers, is in freefall. Stellantis's Toledo plant, home of the Jeep Wrangler, slashed production. After sales collapsed 18% year over year. Parking lots outside the plant are now graveyards of unsold vehicles. Billions of dollars in shiny metal nobody can afford to buy. Electric vehicle assembly lines that were supposed to secure Ohio's future are instead draining it dry. By year's end, analysts warn Ohio's auto industry could suffer $2.3 billion in lost output. The shockwaves are hitting households like a wrecking ball. The average Ohio family now carries $89,000 in debt, and auto loan delinquencies are spiking at 11% higher than last year. Retailers in Columbus report sales down 20%, while restaurants can't fill tables even on weekends. At Easton Town Center, one of the Midwest's biggest malls, foot traffic has collapsed 22%, wiping millions from shop revenues. The ripple is brutal. When workers lose jobs, businesses lose customers, and entire communities lose hope. The housing market, once Ohio's safe haven, is unraveling too. Median home prices have slipped from $245,000 to $210,000 in less than a year, and inventories are ballooning, up 70% in Cincinnati and 60% in Akron. With mortgage rates stuck above 7%, a modest $200,000 house now costs over $1,500 a month in payments. Impossible for families surviving on unemployment checks capped at $648 a week. For thousands, foreclosure is no longer a distant fear. It's a date circled on the calendar. Farmers, Ohio's supposed backbone, are getting crushed as well. Corn and soybean prices are down 12%, while fertilizer costs have surged 34% since 2022. A farmer with 1,000 acres now faces losses of $80,000 or more per season. China's retaliatory tariffs have closed doors to export markets worth billions. Family farms that stood for generations are now days away from bankruptcy. If nothing changes, Ohio could lose 50,000 jobs by the end of 2025. That's not just statistics. That's entire neighborhoods in Cleveland, Dayton, and Toledo turning into economic graveyards. Food banks already report 32% more demand year over year, with middle-class families now begging for groceries. Ohio isn't just struggling, it's suffocating. And unless the spiral stops, the heart of the Midwest may flatline before America even notices. Number 4. Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is collapsing in slow motion, but the fall is accelerating. In just 3 weeks, the state shed over 18,000 jobs, ripping through its fragile economy like a sledgehammer through glass. Entire industries that once defined Pennsylvania, steel, coal, and manufacturing, are being gutted again. Only this time, it isn't the 1980s. It's happening right now in 2025, and the pain is sharper because families thought the worst was behind them. Trump's 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum have detonated like a bomb in Pittsburgh and Bethlehem, cities once nicknamed the workshop of the world. The cost of producing steel has skyrocketed by $130 per ton, while overseas buyers slash orders by nearly 45%. Local plants that used to hum with activity are shutting down furnaces and sending workers home in droves. ArcelorMittal's Pennsylvania operations alone estimate losses of $300 million this year, with thousands of workers already pink-slipped. But steel isn't the only casualty. Pennsylvania's coal sector, already on life support, is being finished off by collapsing demand and high regulatory costs. In 2024, Pennsylvania mined just 40 million short tons of coal, down from 70 million in 2010. Now, layoffs are accelerating as power plants shift to cheaper natural gas. Mining towns in western Pennsylvania are watching their last paychecks disappear, and with them, the only reason people stayed. The state's logistics and warehousing industry, centered around the I-81 corridor in Philadelphia, is also spiraling. With imports throttled by tariffs and trade wars, cargo shipments are down 22% year over year. Companies like FedEx and Amazon, which once hired thousands of Pennsylvanians for distribution centers, are quietly cutting hours and freezing hiring. Trucking firms report revenue declines of nearly $50,000 per rig annually, forcing many small operators into bankruptcy. For a state that markets itself as a transportation hub, that's an economic gut punch. Meanwhile, ordinary households are drowning. Pennsylvania's median household income sits around $73,000, but with inflation still biting, that doesn't stretch far. Mortgage rates above 7% have torpedoed home affordability. A $250,000 home in suburban Harrisburg now carries a monthly payment of $1,850, up from $1,250 just 2 years ago. Foreclosure filings in Philadelphia jumped 28% year over year, and in smaller towns like Scranton and Erie, homeowners are simply walking away. The retail collapse is equally shocking. Philadelphia's King of Prussia Mall, one of the largest in the U.S., reports sales down 18% from last year. Restaurants are closing at record speed. In Pittsburgh alone, over 250 eateries have shut their doors since January. Retail workers, already paid near minimum wages averaging $13.50 an hour, are being cast aside at a scale not seen since the Great Recession. Farmers are taking body blows too. Pennsylvania's dairy industry, worth $1.6 billion annually, is reeling from collapsing milk prices. A gallon that fetched $3.60 in 2022 now sells closer to $2.80, wiping tens of thousands in revenue off family farms. At the same time, feed and fertilizer costs have risen nearly 30% since 2022. Hundreds of family dairies that survived generations are now at the brink of foreclosure. If the bleeding continues, Pennsylvania could lose 60,000 jobs by year's end. Food banks in Philadelphia and Allentown already report 35% higher demand than last summer, with once middle-class families waiting in line for donated groceries. The Keystone State, long seen as America's industrial backbone, is crumbling under the weight of tariffs, trade wars, and runaway costs. What's left is a state that looks less like the engine of America and more like a warning sign that the nation itself is on the edge of collapse. Number 3. New Jersey. New Jersey, the so-called Garden State, is watching its economy rot from the inside out. In the last 3 weeks alone, more than 20,000 workers have been shoved out of their jobs, the single fastest pace of layoffs the state has seen since the 2008 crash. The shock is rippling across industries, leaving behind empty office towers, shuttered warehouses, and families hanging on by a thread. The biggest blow? Finance and corporate services. New Jersey has long depended on its proximity to Wall Street, with more than 350,000 residents working in banking, insurance, and back-office corporate support. But as higher interest rates choke lending and Trump's tariff war rattles global markets, multinational companies are slashing payrolls. In just weeks, major firms in Jersey City and Newark have cut thousands of positions, while smaller financial services outfits report revenue down 25% compared to last summer. Analysts warn that New Jersey's finance sector could shed $1.5 billion in income this year alone. Warehousing and logistics, once New Jersey's post-pandemic boom industry, is imploding. The massive distribution hubs near Elizabeth and along the I-95 corridor thrived when imports from Asia flooded the port of Newark. Now, with tariffs throttling trade and container volumes down 20% year over year, those warehouses sit half empty. Amazon has frozen hiring, FedEx is cutting hours, and smaller trucking firms are reporting losses of nearly $60,000 per truck annually. Hundreds of drivers have already abandoned rigs they can't afford to operate, leaving the state's logistics backbone fractured. Even New Jersey's pharmaceutical pride, an industry that employs more than 110,000 people, isn't immune. Drug exports are facing retaliatory tariffs in Europe and Asia, wiping hundreds of millions off revenue sheets. Plants in Princeton and Somerset County are downsizing staff, with local reports of layoffs in the thousands. For a state that branded itself the medicine chest of the world, this collapse is like ripping out its very identity. Meanwhile, ordinary families are being crushed by costs. Median household income in New Jersey hovers around $97,000, one of the highest in the nation. But with property taxes averaging a shocking $9,500 per year and mortgage rates over 7%, even middle-class homeowners are drowning. A modest $400,000 home in suburban Bergen County now costs over $3,000 a month in mortgage payments, before property taxes and insurance. Foreclosure filings are up 31% statewide since last summer, with Atlantic County leading the surge. The service economy is collapsing right behind it. In Atlantic City, casinos that once brought in $2.6 billion annually report gaming revenues down 14% year over year. Layoffs in hospitality are accelerating, with hotel workers and dealers joining the unemployment lines. Across the state, restaurant closures are piling up. More than 1,200 eateries have already shut down in 2025, wiping tens of millions from local economies. If this spiral continues, New Jersey could lose 70,000 jobs before the year ends. Food banks in Newark and Camden are already stretched to breaking, reporting 40% more demand than a year ago. Families that once enjoyed steady, union-backed paychecks are now lining up for free groceries. The Garden State isn't just wilting, it's rotting from its economic roots, a warning to the rest of America that even wealthy, high-income states can collapse overnight when tariffs, debt, and inflation converge like a perfect storm. Number 2. Illinois. Illinois is unraveling like a sweater pulled at the seams. In just 3 weeks, more than 22,000 workers have lost their jobs, a wave of pink slips hitting factories, offices, and retail chains across the state. For a state already crushed under the weight of debt, corruption, and sky-high taxes, this new round of economic carnage feels less like a setback and more like the beginning of a death spiral. Chicago, Illinois' beating heart, is now one of its biggest weak points. The city's office vacancy rate has exploded past 25%, leaving gleaming skyscrapers downtown eerily empty. Each empty office represents not just lost rent, but lost jobs. Corporate downsizing has gutted back-office positions in finance, tech, and insurance. In just weeks, more than 7,000 white-collar workers in Chicago's Loop have been laid off, stripping tens of millions of dollars in wages out of the local economy. That collapse filters into everything else. Restaurants near Michigan Avenue are reporting sales down 30%, while small retailers are shuttering at a rate not seen since 2009. Manufacturing, once Illinois' pride, is being slaughtered by tariffs. Trump's 50% steel and aluminum tariffs have raised production costs by $120 to $140 per ton, and buyers in Europe and Asia are slashing orders. Illinois' machinery and equipment plants in Rockford and Peoria, including Caterpillar's massive operations, are cutting shifts. Caterpillar alone, which employs 15,000 Illinois workers, has already announced losses projected at $400 million this year due to plunging overseas demand. For the working-class families who depend on those jobs, every shuttered line feels like a death sentence. The state's agriculture industry, worth more than $19 billion annually, is in crisis too. Corn and soybean farmers are watching prices collapse under the weight of China's retaliatory tariffs. Soybeans that once fetched $14 per bushel now trade closer to $11.50, slashing thousands of dollars off every 1,000-acre farm. Add in fertilizer prices up 30% since 2022, and diesel costs still hovering near $4.50 a gallon, and thousands of Illinois farmers are watching their profit margins turn into red ink. Economists estimate the state's farmers could lose more than $2 billion in 2025 alone. But Illinois' financial wounds don't stop there. Property taxes here are the second highest in the nation, averaging over $6,000 per household annually. Combine that with mortgage rates above 7%, and middle-class families are suffocating. In suburban Cook and DuPage counties, foreclosure filings have jumped 33% year over year. A modest $350,000 home now comes with a monthly mortgage north of $2,700 before taxes and insurance. For families already juggling credit card debt, which averages $9,800 per household in Illinois, it's a ticking time bomb. Meanwhile, Illinois' state government is staring at a fiscal abyss. With over $140 billion in unfunded pension liabilities, the layoffs and shrinking tax base could push the state into deeper crisis. Every lost job means fewer income taxes, fewer sales taxes, and more strain on already stretched welfare programs. Food banks in Chicago report demand up 38% year over year, with once middle-class families now waiting in line for groceries. If trends hold, Illinois could lose 75,000 jobs by year's end. That's not an economic downturn. That's devastation. The land of Lincoln now risks becoming the land of layoffs, foreclosures, and boarded-up businesses. Illinois isn't just struggling, it's melting down in real time, a warning that even America's third-largest metro area can't withstand the perfect storm of tariffs, debt, and runaway costs. Number 1. Virginia. Virginia, the state that lives in the shadow of the nation's capital, is now ground zero for America's job market collapse. In just 3 weeks, more than 25,000 Virginians have been laid off, the largest short-term bloodletting of any state in the country. What was once a stable blend of government contracts, tech hubs, and military spending has suddenly turned into quicksand, swallowing thousands of families whole. Northern Virginia, the crown jewel of the state's economy, has been hit hardest. For years, Fairfax, Arlington, and Loudoun County thrived on defense contracts, tech jobs, and the federal government's endless appetite for services. But with Washington slashing budgets and companies pulling back on projects, contractors are bleeding jobs. More than 10,000 white-collar layoffs have already swept through the D.C. suburbs. Tech firms that once paid six-figure salaries are cutting staff by the hundreds, while government consultants report contract cancellations worth billions of dollars. The result? Office towers in Tysons and Crystal City stand half-dark, their vacancy rates climbing past 20% for the first time in a decade. The military presence that once acted as Virginia's safety net is also faltering. Hampton Roads, home to the largest naval base in the world, is reeling as shipbuilding and maintenance contracts shrink under tariff-driven budget chaos. Newport News Shipbuilding, which employs over 25,000 workers, has announced slowdowns that could cut billions from the local economy. Shipyard suppliers estimate revenue losses of $250 million this year, and small businesses that depend on those workers are already closing doors. Virginia's manufacturing backbone, from tobacco to textiles, isn't faring any better. Tariffs on imports have raised material costs by 30%, while retaliatory duties have slashed export markets. Furniture plants in the southern counties are operating at 40% capacity, while tobacco farmers are staring at plummeting overseas demand. Soybeans, Virginia's top cash crop worth $360 million annually, are now trading 12% lower than last year. For a farmer running 1,500 acres, that means losses of $100,000 or more in a single season. Many are now juggling loans they can't pay back, with banks quietly warning that farm foreclosures could spike by 25% this year. And then there's housing. Virginia's real estate market, inflated by years of DC spillover, is cracking. In Fairfax County, the median home price has tumbled from $720,000 to $660,000 in less than 6 months. Mortgage rates above 7% now mean a standard suburban home requires payments of nearly $4,000 a month before property taxes. Foreclosure filings are up 29% statewide, with Richmond and Norfolk leading the surge. For middle-class families already stretched thin by credit card balances averaging $9,200, the math no longer works. Retail and hospitality are crumbling too. In Virginia Beach, tourism revenues are down 15% year over year, costing the region nearly $400 million in lost income. Hotel layoffs are climbing, and restaurants, already on razor-thin margins, are closing at record speed. Across the state, more than 1,500 small businesses have shuttered since January, wiping billions out of local economies. If nothing changes, economists warn Virginia could lose 80,000 jobs by the end of 2025. Food banks in Alexandria and Norfolk are already overwhelmed, reporting 40% more families seeking help than a year ago. The so-called Old Dominion is now the epicenter of America's jobs collapse, a brutal reminder that when Washington sneezes, Virginia doesn't just catch a cold. It's catching an economic plague that could take years, maybe decades, to recover from.